Hey, welcome back to The Champion's Mind. I'm your host, Nirra. Today we're talking about staying calm in the chaos. The world is loud, life moves fast. People expect you to keep up, respond instantly, and push through everything. But what if you didn't match the noise? What if calm was your edge? What if stillness was the thing that helped you lead, grow, and stay grounded when everyone else is spinning? That's what we're getting into today, because calm isn't something you either have or don't. It's something you learn to build. Do you ever feel like everything's happening all at once? Work, family, pressure, expectations, your own thoughts. It can feel like you're standing in the middle of a tornado. This episode is about finding your center in the storm, about how to create calm that holds even when nothing else does. So just pulling from like a personal experience of when I was younger. Like I said, growing up, I always had this thing where I knew I had inner peace, but the way I got to finding my inner peace was really through a lot of life struggle. So growing up, I grew up with 6 brothers. We grew up in Montreal. Most times we didn't have enough food to eat, or a lot of times we were getting evicted from our 1-bedroom apartment, which we all shared. And there was a consistent flux of that. Like going home, I remember going home, walking home with my brother during lunch hours just to go and pass time, knowing that we weren't going to eat lunch. So we would walk home. Literally, there's nothing in the fridge, look in the fridge, and then walk back and then go play with our friends in like the schoolyard. And that was kind of like our life on repeat. We always didn't have enough food. We always were moving because at the end of the month, we really just couldn't pay the rent. And I remember at one point, everything was just getting to me. I felt like I had no type of security, no certainty, and like my life around me was like falling apart. But one thing in my family is that I'm one girl out of 6 brothers. So a lot of the time, like growing up in a household full of men, the thing that we reverted to was like never show weakness, never show how you're feeling, really never express any type of vulnerability. So although we were all struggling to get by and really just process the pain of not having enough food, our father not being in our life, having to figure out how we're going to eat, not knowing if we're going to have a bed and a room to sleep in that night. All of that was a lot of pain that we had to process without any parental help, as my mom was always like working. She worked 2 or 3 jobs just to make sure that we were safe and had enough money, one, just to eat the bare minimum, and also just enough to be able to at least pay the rent for the end of the month. So that's when I really started to notice that I just felt so uneasy. My life felt so uncertain. Everything around me felt like there was no constant, no stability. And I was just getting to a place where I didn't have any groundedness, and how I found myself in this place where everything around me felt like chaos. Everything around me felt like it was falling. But the one thing that I got really good at in that time of uncertainty was trying to find some type of peace and calm within. And I used that a lot through basketball. There was times where I was just feeling it, like I couldn't bear the fact that my stomach was hurting and I didn't eat for the last 2 days, or I couldn't bear the fact that my mom wasn't home and I never saw her, or I couldn't bear with the fact that I would walk into my mom's room sometimes and like I can see how depressed and how stressed she was just trying to figure out how to support a family of 7 on her own. Like it was just really hard to deal with a lot of that as a child, and I didn't have anybody to help me process it. So I found a lot of just inner peace in going to the gym and really pushing myself and not having to, one, sit at home and just feel my stomach hurting because I didn't eat, or having to go home and be reminded that we're just in a place that wasn't stable. It wasn't something that we can live under. And the stress of all of it was just too much. So I really found a lot of peace in just movement, basketball. Sometimes I would just sit alone and really process my feelings and just sit with it. And that helped me to find the inner peace within. But a lot of it came through sport, and that's how I found my refuge. So essentially, calm isn't something that is like something you're born with, or it's something that you just have naturally. Calm is something actually you can learn. And I learned it through, one, being tested. So I do have 6 brothers, and I don't know if most of you understand what it means to live in a household where you're the only girl and you have 6 brothers, but they did a lot of pushing. Like I remember just them trying to push every button, and initially I would just give in and give them the reaction to whatever they're pushing the button on. And then I started to notice the more that I gave them a response that was what they wanted, the more they kept pushing. And in that moment, I just realized like, I'm giving him all the power and ammunition to push my buttons because I'm not choosing a response. I'm allowing him to dictate how I respond, which is giving him more motivation and more fuel to push the buttons within me. So I did this little test when I was like younger, and every time my brother would be like, "Oh, you're ugly," or "You're this," and they would try to push a button, I would just be like, "Okay." And in that moment, I took like 5 seconds to figure out one, not how they're going to change my reaction to them, meaning that they weren't going to dictate how I respond, but I was going to take that moment to just be like, all right, like, how do I want to respond in this moment? And that's when I started to learn that the more I didn't give them a reaction, the less they felt motivated to push my buttons. And then the more they just stopped doing it. It got to the point where they stopped doing it because they knew they weren't going to get the reaction out of me. And when I learned that specific lesson, I knew that it didn't just apply to like my brothers just wanting to push my buttons, but it applied to my life. And knowing that I didn't have the most stable circumstances, that I wasn't going to let my environment or the circumstances around me dictate how I respond, but I was going to respond in a way that I felt was beneficial to me. So essentially, when I was going through all that chaos earlier in my childhood, I started to redefine what it meant for me. And essentially, I came to this conclusion where I felt like calm didn't mean that I was passive. It was just choosing how to respond to the outside circumstances of what was happening to me. And I actually found an anchor in that, knowing that like I didn't really have a constant in my life, whether it be food, shelter. Sometimes we were homeless. I remember being homeless with my mom, living in shelters, just always something was happening and nothing felt certain, that I really started to feel like I needed something to ground me. And that's when I started to lean into building the space within myself of calmness that helped me get through the times of uncertainty and always constant changing and never feeling like we had enough to survive. And really, it started with just going within myself and trying to figure out, how do I create peace within me when everything else around me was chaos and constantly changing. And that's where I started to cultivate this place of calmness. So the ways that I learned to like cultivate calmness and groundedness in me was to find anchors. And what it looked like was a little bit of routine. I found like refuge in my routine. Obviously, at the time it was basketball. I really loved basketball and I was dedicated to it. So it looked like, okay, I know I have basketball practice tomorrow, and that was my anchor. So I just built my days around things that were super important to me. It happened to be basketball. So if I knew I had a game the next day, I would, one, go to sleep early. When I did get my own room, when we got to a point where we can financially provide for ourselves and I was able to get my own space, I would go into my space, make sure my room was clean, because I felt like that helped bring some groundedness and just clarity. And then from there, I created this routine where if I had a game at 10 a.m., I would go to sleep by like 9, wake up, make sure I clean my room, make my bed, get prepared for the game. And then from there, I would get on the bus, go to my game, make sure I was there at least an hour early just to get in shots and do everything. So I just created this routine for myself that allowed me to create anchors in a place where I felt like there was no stability for myself, my family outside of basketball. So what I learned is that you don't have to match the chaos. Obviously, a lot of the times when people are in chaos or feel like everything around them is falling, they oftentimes match it and take on that energy. And I learned in that moment, the more I was like consuming or taking in the fact that I didn't have enough to eat or everything around me was uncertain, the more I felt anxious, the more I felt unsteady. And that was just really messing with my peace of mind, and my ability to focus and really just push myself to be the best in basketball. So once I really locked in on understanding that everything around me could be falling apart, but as long as I, one, felt grounded, had peace within myself, that I would be able to weather the storm. And like the greatest metaphor that I see myself as or in is the fact that when I was growing up, I felt like everything around me was unstable. And I would use the metaphor of a tornado. And if anybody knows like the concept of a tornado, in a tornado, everything around the tornado is chaotic, it's moving, it's uncertain. But when you go in the middle of the tornado, there's actually a lot of peace and stillness. And that's how I wanted to view my life. I wanted to be the person who, regardless if things are not working out, if everything is chaotic around me, that I was still peaceful. And I started to use that metaphor and apply it to my life. And that's how I became better at not at just being able to respond to situations in a way that was beneficial for me and not taking on how people would respond to me or how my life was happening in that moment, but being able to be peaceful, to respond, and to act in a way that would, one, help me make the situation better, not worse. Here are some actionable takeaways. What you can try is, in your moments of overwhelm, try to pause before you react. Try identifying one daily ritual that brings you calm. It could be a walk, a playlist, a deep breath, or time in silence. Another actionable step you can use, instead of trying to fix chaos, try observing it. Let the noise exist without joining it. Another tip that can also be applied to your daily life is build a calm habit, something simple you can lean on before big meetings, workouts, or conversations. And then lastly, remind yourself that calm is not avoidance. It's leadership over your nervous system. Here's what I want to leave with you. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to match the chaos just to prove you're present. Calm is a muscle, and the more you build it, the more grounded you become. So this week, try it. Practice calm in one small moment. Take the breath, step back, choose clarity. And if this episode helped you do that, subscribe to the next show so you don't miss the next one. And if someone in your life could use a reset, share it with them too. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you in the next one. And remember, your mindset is your power. Use it. Peace.